So we were talking about Andrew Feinstein's attempt to deflect attention away from very real hard facts to do with the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission, that report, their findings, and also to gloss over problems to do with the non-binding working definition supplied by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. I'm going to post a link. That the applicability of those definitions, where there's contestation. Andrew's very deftly avoided even referring to that document. So it's an attempt really to create an Andrew Feinstein version of anti-Semitism, which is, you can refer to it as an anti-Semitism light. It's anti-Semitism is in his book really is only the most crude instances of anti-Semitism, like anti-Jewish tropes and resort to violence. And in his worldview, engaging in some of the activism surrounding anti-Semitism for him is uncomfortable or counterproductive, and he claims that it reduces the power and strength of his anti-apartheid narrative, etc., founded as it is on his very tragic experience with his own family. Andrew's not the only person on the planet to have lost relatives because of the Holocaust. I'm not going to jump on that platform. My ancestors were Latviks. They were refugees from the Pale of Settlement in Tsarist Russia who came to South Africa seeking religious freedom that were not, cultural freedoms that were not granted them under the Tsar. And these are the freedoms which Andrew essentially takes for granted in a liberal democracy such as the UK. In his isolated bubble, where living in a position of privilege, he's not confronted on a daily basis with. It's not just Holocaust denial; it's an attempt to control the narrative of Jewish identity, to circumscribe Jewish identity as the only identity which is of any relevance is the white European version. Okay, so Andrew Feinstein lives in a bubble of white privilege, one which seems to exist completely independently from the experience of Mizrahi Jews from the land of Mitzrayim, Arab Jews from Iraq, Jews from Afghanistan, Yemenites, Jews from the North African countries like Morocco, for instance. And the Feinstein narrative, unfortunately, it's bound up with really an attempt to protect and shelter that position of privilege. So at the same time that he comes across as a person who, he's latched onto the anti-apartheid movement and he calls himself an anti-racist, when it comes to racism as it is experienced by Jews of color, that experience is completely nullified. A Jew such as myself doesn't exist, right? My own problematic journey as a person who was sectioned under apartheid, niggerized and racialized, where I occupy essentially a transracial identity, where the race that was on my birth certificate is no longer a descriptor of my identity today, where there's been a contestation in a court of law over my identity, where I'm subjected to accusations that I'm a rainbow person in one person, that I'm black when I feel like it and white when I want to be, that I was merely wanting to assist a company because I was colored. Plays itself out examples where affidavits drafted by SAPS, South African Police Services, the gentleman makes an assumption that I am a person of color without me having to put that number in the computer. There's a problem of race definition in South Africa. We have got an egregious history of race labeling, and Andrew is completely oblivious to this. In his world, Jews are white, and therefore an anti-racist narrative might involve solidarity with the Palestinians who are black, or persons of color, against the oppressor, which is the white Ashkenazi, the Jewish minority in Israel, which yes, it's an artificial minority that's arisen as a result of a very peculiar set of circumstances. Okay, so Andrew, there are a couple of things that are just wrong about Jeremy Corbyn's position. You cannot simply reduce an entire nation of people to the status of heretics merely because you disagree with their religion or their identity. In your deontology, right, if I had to apply your rules universally, you're in exactly the same situation. If you were Catholic, you would be demanding that all Protestants in Northern Ireland are removed from that territory because there's a disagreement between Catholics and Protestants as to who the rightful owners of Northern Ireland should or should not be. If you take a deontological viewpoint, which is really Kant's idea of ethics, an ethical system that's consistent, that if you were making a consistent ethical, which a lot of anti-apartheid activists, I think, seem to act in a deontological manner. They seem to operate on the assumption that you can impose the rules that arose during the anti-apartheid movement onto other similar struggles. Okay, so let's unpick some of these ideas. Right? There's an idea that you can simply impose race labels on the situation, and if you look at those, if you perceive Jews as a distinct race, right, and Palestinians are a separate race, then obviously the difference, the separation between Palestinians and the Israelis must equal apartheid. Well, there's nothing logical in that statement, because nations are not races. Attributing race to Jews for the purposes of arriving at an analogous situation, not only is it ethically wrong, because there's no internal logic that's consistent with any other system. It's an entirely new system that you're deriving. No one during apartheid imposed labels from abroad. Apartheid was something that was quite curious. It was a system of race classification and segregation and denationalization and disenfranchisement and disempowerment that arose from within South Africa. Likewise, none of the Bantustans were ever contesting of power within the country. So some of these so-called Bantustan states were puppets. They were not in a sense of like the PA or the state of Gaza in a war situation. Gaza is more so. If you look at the status quo of Gaza, it is only occupied by Israel because the UN deems it to be. Israel withdrew, but the UN continues to act as if Israel is an occupation of Gaza. Similarly, the PA only recently became the state of Palestine. And there are some serious objections that one can make as to what is occurring. And primarily the objection that I have when people like Feinstein rise up on a platform and say, you know, we're demanding equality for Palestinians. Okay, fair enough. No one can disagree with that statement. But I don't see Palestinians waving Israeli flags around and demanding to be included in the Israeli state. What I see is a supersessionist movement, a movement of replacement. You could call it replacement theology. It's an attempt to replace the Israeli state with an Arab state. So Zionism versus Arabism. And for me, that's highly problematic. Whether it's two injustices, injustice of the Nakba versus the injustice of the Holocaust, or the narrative of Arabism versus the narrative of Zionism, what you have is a toxic mix on either side. It's a mutually irreconcilable positions that neither of those positions can be reconciled. And therefore, one should rationally ask ourselves the question, why not measure the Palestinian struggle by the value systems and histories of our own apartheid struggle, right? Anti-apartheid struggle. When I was a member of the AAM, if there was any question of legitimacy, you could always point to a document known as the Freedom Charter. It was a secular document drafted at Kliptown in 1950s. And it is the document which essentially became the new constitution, the new We the People constitution that informs the constitutional dispensation of democratic South Africa. Now, if there had been no Freedom Charter, if there had been no attempt to create a broad platform that was inclusive of various positions, political positions, whether it's the rights of children or the rights of, even in the Freedom Charter has Save Our Seas, there's even environmental, the beginnings of environmental justice movement. If that had not happened, there would not be a democratic dispensation in South Africa. And I find it very strange that someone like Andrew Feinstein, who claims to be an anti-apartheid activist, who has a history of being in the House of Assembly, doesn't see the parallels that there's certain things which are uniquely South African that don't exist in the Middle East. And if the ANC, for instance, had been merely a religious party, I don't think it would have prevailed. I think that it was a secular movement which won the day through a negotiated end game where there was a compromise position. I see no similar compromises, whether Fatah or Hamas, or there doesn't seem to be any scope for compromise on either side. So having said that, and I've gotten a bit of a deep dive into the problems in the Middle East, to just try to bring it back to Corbyn. So what is wrong with Feinstein giving Corbyn he's not an anti-Semite stamp of approval, without bothering to engage with what are the accusations made? Well, it comes down to the definition of anti-Semitism. If you follow the International Holocaust Remembrance, the non-binding series of definitions, essentially denying the right of the State of Israel to exist as a country is classified as a grounds for revering anti-Semitism. Similarly, claiming that Israel is a racist endeavor is grounds for revering anti-Semitism. And what are those definitions doing there? there's no attempt to engage with that broad consensus position that has been adopted by the European Council, by the way. That it's not merely a couple of Jewish grannies in Islington who disagree with Corbyn. It's the European Union that disagrees with Corbyn. And UK obviously can come up with its own view of what anti-Semitism is or is not. And likewise, South Africans can come up with their definitions. But unless we engage with a working definition, so for starters, hostility towards Jewish identity. For me, that is very important, because to reduce anti-Semitism to mere crude tropes, you off the hook, Jeremy. I don't see Jeremy Corbyn engaging in the kind of crude statements that are attributed to the members of the KKK or David Duke, who, the former Grand Wizard, came up with a series of anti-Semitic statements. I don't see Jeremy Corbyn in the same league as the Grand Wizard, a white supremacist, by the way. But I do see Corbyn engaging in something that's more insidious and far worse, and that is accusations of heresy, accusations of Satanism and witchcraft that are consistent with the an Arabism, an supremacist outlook, where anyone who disagrees with the Arabist viewpoint is an outsider, is haram, is not halal, is out of the fold, and there's no attempt to debate. You're automatically kicked out, right? So, Feinstein, your crass reductionism of anti-Semitism to mere tropes, to the worst examples of anti-Semitism, right? Jews gunned down in a shul is anti-Semitism. But there are no degrees of anti-Semitic behavior leading up to that, in the same way that Rwanda had a radio station that was started broadcasting propaganda distinguishing Hutsis from Tutsis, right? Which resulted in the Rwandan genocide. Now, you claim to be a student of the Holocaust, but you don't seem to have any reference point to the propaganda machine of Hitler and Goebbels. That if you look at some of the propaganda that I've seen, specifically how it's become an attempt to save the white messiah for the region. We want to create the next prime minister, bring back Corbyn by essentially revising history. Let's just create almost a Hollywood narrative using Islington as a base point. If we can cast doubt on whistleblowers within the party, then we can just broad brushstrokes remove the entire framework, the entire edifice of the Holocaust remembrance definitions of anti-Semitism from the political scene. And essentially, isn't that what you're hoping to achieve, is to reduce any opposition to your viewpoint coming as a white privileged person of Jewish origin, where you harping on about your own narrative that excludes everyone else's narrative, that excludes the Mizrahi Jews, that excludes Jews from Syria, for instance, and ignoring the 900,000 Jewish refugees in 1948 and their plight.